Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And it has been a solid year on the field for Oakland here in 2034. A 50-41 record, 91 games into the season, tied for first place in the American League Western Division with the Texas Rangers right now. That means we're also tied with the Rangers for the second wild card spot, 3 games clear of the Orioles for the final wild card spot. Clearly would love to win the division, which would assure us of at least the third seed in the American League. Right now, both the Blue Jays in the AL East and the White Sox in the AL Central have better records than either the Rangers or our A's. So even if we win the division, when all is said and done, may be a bit of a struggle to get into one of those top 2 seeds and avoid the wild card series. But if we do end up in a wild card series for a 4th consecutive season, at least we'd like to be doing it from a relative position of strength with the 3rd overall seed in the American League, and winning the Western Division this year will assure us of that at a minimum. So that is certainly our goal over these final 71 games of the regular season here in 2034. We've got a pretty favorable schedule ahead of us for the rest of this month of July. 3 games at home against Houston, then 3 on the road at the Giants before the All-Star break. And then when we get back from the All-Star break, we've got a 10-game homestand, 3 against the Angels, 4 against the Guardians, and then 3 against the Astros. So although it's only July 11th, we only have 3 more road games in the entire month of July, which is a pretty favorable schedule for us to hopefully do better than the 4-4 record we put up over the first few games of this month. We started the episode on the front office page, and you can see we continue to run with the lowest budget in payroll in baseball. But importantly, we do have a fair amount of money available, and we've also got a little more than we needed set aside for the draft budget. But this could be a year where we may go after a couple of players who are looking for more than slot. Perhaps even take a flyer on one of those highly regarded but allegedly impossible to sign players that are targeting college right now. Because with the season we've had so far, I don't think we're desperate to do something in the trade market. As we talked about when we did our mid-season review in the last episode, there's certainly things that we could use help with. A corner outfielder with a really good bat would help us. A great hitting middle infielder would help us. Even a utility infielder with a really good glove who perhaps wasn't a right-handed hitter could help us as well. And we're always on the lookout for a little more pitching help, whether it be a starter or a reliever, even though our pitching staff has been pretty good this year. Taking a look at what's available on the trade market right now, though, with 3 weeks to go until the deadline, there's not necessarily a guy out there who I think is going to move the needle that significantly for us. Our hope is that maybe over the next week, week and a half, as we get through the All-Star break, there may be some other opportunities to add more interesting players who are either added to the trade block or we're just able to come up with a trade offer organically by reaching out to one of our competitors and making them an offer that they can't refuse. But in the meantime, I'm going to operate under the assumption that perhaps we can be a little more ambitious than normal in terms of the potential signing bonuses that we will be giving out to the players that we are going to be drafting momentarily. And as always, I want to start off by thanking the members of our worldwide scouting department who have shared some thoughts with us on which direction they would go in this draft. I tend to agree with the general sentiment of most viewers, which is that there's not really anyone that really stands out as that exciting, a guy that we have to get with this 30th pick of the draft. There's some good talent available, but there's not anyone that I'm personally drooling over and ready to run the card up to the commissioner to get into our organization. And I think that was the general consensus of most people who opined. Some interesting guys out there, and we are going to have an opportunity to make 3 of the next 9 picks with the 2 supplemental first rounders we have from the departures of Chase Burns and Kyle Manzardo to greener pastures this offseason. So we're going to get to make some picks in very short order when we do get started. But I think when all is said and done, the guy that we take with our second supplemental first round pick, or even our eventual second round pick, may end up being even better than whoever we pick now at number 30 overall, because I don't think there's necessarily a ton of differentiation in the players that we're going to be talking about. And oftentimes when I start off these draft or international amateur free agent episodes, I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm going to end up doing. That is absolutely not the case this year. There's about 15 players that I think we're going to talk through now, many of whom our viewers have shared opinions on in the comments to the last episode. And while I'm pretty confident we're going to probably end up with 4 or 5 of these 15 players that we talk about, I really have no clue right now what 4 or 5 those might be, and also the potential order in which we might draft them. So hopefully talking through this with you now will help get me to the correct decisions. We'll start with the position players. And Greg Moreno is a guy who was expected to go with the 29th pick right in front of us. He is one of those impossible to sign players, so it's possible he may linger on the market a bit longer. A very solid and well-balanced bat, good speed, high adaptability and intelligence. He's kind of a Matt outfielder, a left fielder with that not great arm. I don't think we take him with our first pick, being that he's impossible to sign. And even though he was projected to go number 29 in the mock draft, sometimes those impossible to sign players linger a little bit longer. But with one of our supplemental picks, or if he falls into the second or third round, I could certainly see us picking up Moreno, but I don't think he's the answer right now. Similarly, really like the shortstop John Howard. He's durable. Looks like he could have a pretty interesting bat for a middle infielder. Looks competent defensively at second, third, or short. I think he's probably, with those ratings, most naturally a third baseman, quite honestly. Not a lot of speed. He's committed to Stanford. He's also impossible to sign. He's a player who's not going until the third round in the mock draft. So he's a guy that conceivably we've got a decent shot at picking up in the second round, especially given the impossibility to signness of him, if that's a correct turn of phrase. And the last of the impossible to sign position players I want to talk about is Doug Mitchell. He's another guy who's projected to go early in the third round, similar to Howard, so we could wait on him. Another pretty solid-looking bat, one of the better personalities of the youngsters in this draft. Another guy who's really a corner outfielder with decent speed, although not necessarily the greatest instincts on the base paths. Committed to Xavier. Another guy that I would consider taking down the line, but I don't think we take any of the 3 impossible to sign guys here with the 30th pick. Two others to mention, Wilson Para projected to go in the middle of the second round. So if we do want to bring him on board, probably going to need to take him in either our first round pick or one of our two supplemental first rounders. Left-handed hitting, corner outfielder, solid batting profile. The eye's a bit of a question, some good personality traits. Very similar profile to a lot of these other guys that we've talked about, which is why I'm not necessarily rushing the card up to select any of them. And similarly, left fielder Joe Wusow, another guy, contact, gap power, and power, all could be well above average. The eye, average at best. Durable, mediocre defensively, modest speed, some negative personality traits, and he is projected to go with the 32nd pick in the second round, so conceivably could be a guy around with our pick, and he's actually projected to go to us in the second round at this point. So I don't think that any of those first five guys are appropriate targets for this 30th pick, even though it's very conceivable that a couple of them could end up with us down the line. There are, however, three position players who were a bit more popular than the guys that I just talked about with the viewers at large, and also guys who are expected to go very soon in the draft. First is the only 5-star potential everyday player prospect, and that's Andres Vigo. He was the recommendation of Coach 1549. Vigo certainly has the highest ceiling of any of the position players in this draft. He's durable, potentially exceptional power. Coach 1549 brought up you bring a 5-star potential guy with that kind of power on board, and he could be interesting trade bait for us down the line, and he'll certainly also make our minor league system look a little better. My concerns are the lack of speed. He's a mediocre to poor defender given that really bad arm, and he's also got some negative personality traits. So I'm not in love with Vigo, even though according to our scout, he's the highest rated position player out there. He is a guy who is projected to go to us 30th overall in the mock draft. So if we want him, probably need to take him now, or maybe hope he falls to our first supplemental pick. And interestingly, the guy who's supposed to go to us with that first supplemental pick is another guy that we're still thinking about, and that's Sawyer Wenda. He's one of Not My Four Ply's recommendations. A little better outfield range than some of the guys that we've looked at. Decent speed and a pretty well-balanced bat, again, with his eye being the potential concern and issue, as it can tend to be with some younger players who are perhaps not as patient and discerning at the plate as they may need to be. But I think he could be a pretty interesting prospect, and as I mentioned, Dokaben of Kishu, Sawyer Wenda, is projected to go in the next several picks. Interestingly, like Vigo, he's also projected to go to us with our next pick. So if we're going to want Wenda, we're probably going to have to pick him pretty quickly. But the most popular position player among our worldwide scouting department was actually Juan Medina, and he's projected to go with the 7th supplemental pick. So I believe that's right after our second supplemental choice in the draft. So he's right in the neighborhood to be going around now. Don't like the lack of speed. He's a generic corner outfielder with his profile. Do really like the high leadership, adaptability, and work ethic combination in terms of his personality. And he's a guy who could have above average contact and well above average power with decent gap power and a decent eye. Not that that gap power is going to be all that important given his lack of speed. But Calvin Ha Not My Four Ply and Stanley Rosella had Juan Medina ranked as their top position playing prospect, and I think he's interesting. I do like about Vigo and Medina that their demands look like they could be under slot for us, particularly Medina, since he's only normal in terms of his signing difficulty. So that could give us a little more money saved up to go after some of these impossible to sign guys down the line, while also still maintaining the flexibility to potentially add some talent in trade before we get to the trade deadline in about 3 weeks. But those of you who have followed me over the years know that there's a whole nother side of the ball away from hitting and playing in the field that I pay a lot of attention to, and that's, of course, the potential pitchers. And there's also several pitchers that we're thinking about picking here. Did get some commentary, most notably from Dodo Dude, about maybe looking for college pitchers, and it is something I've done offline, but honestly, the talent of the college pitchers who are available here and the college players in general who are available here at pick number 30 overall is nowhere near first round kind of talent. There's a couple decent-ish reliever prospects that maybe once we start getting towards the third, fourth, fifth rounds, we maybe start nibbling at, but really nobody interesting at all college-wise, unfortunately, here in the draft this season. Still are several interesting players to think about, though. A guy that we're not going to take now is a reliever, Chris Hedge. It doesn't look like he goes in the first 5 rounds of the draft, but Paul West identified him as a potentially interesting guy to go after. Do like some of the personality traits. Do like that he's a 17-year-old who's already throwing in the mid-90s with ground ball tendencies. Do like that he's a potential 4-pitch reliever. So I think there's a lot to like about Mr. Hedge, but I don't think a high school reliever with 30 stamina and 30 holding runners is necessarily a guy that we're going to go after these first few rounds of the draft. But if he lingers on the market and we get towards the 4th or 5th round, he may be somebody who could fill a spot on our team. Starting pitcher Kevin Fifield was the 3rd choice of Danny Trainer, a guy who could have stuff, movement, and control all above average. Potential 4-pitch arsenal, but a lot of work to do on 3 of those 4 pitches. Pretty good stamina. Another high schooler throwing in the mid-90s already. So I think he's an interesting prospect, and Fifield is supposed to go with the 10th pick in the 2nd round. So if we're going to pick him, we probably need to bring him on board in one of the next few picks. Federico Arriola, 17-year-old. Average stuff if he reaches his full potential, but plus movement and plus control. Potentially a 5-pitch arsenal of slightly above average major league pitches. Good stamina, great at holding on runners, and some positive personality traits. So I think he's an interesting guy as well. He's not projected to go until early 3rd round, so we may have a little bit more of an opportunity to scoop him up later. And we can say the same thing about Zaire McKenneth, 18-year-old, projected to go in the middle of the 3rd round. Potentially a 6-pitch arsenal, solid stamina, not at all good at holding on runners, but we think his stuff and his control could be a bit above average, and he could have decent movement on his pitches. So particularly guys like Arriola and McKenneth, who aren't projected to go to the 3rd round, could be a nice 2nd round pick for us, and maybe we hope that one of them slips to the 22nd or so pick in the 3rd round, and we get good value on a guy like that there. Another guy who might fall is Billy Thompson, 18-year-old out of Alexandria, Virginia. Potential 4-pitch arsenal. borderline stamina for a starter, solid at holding on runners, and we think he could be a little bit above average if everything goes well. Does have a high work ethic. But Jabao Thompson, not projected to go until the 5th round. So out of this crew, Fifield seems to be the one that we might need to act on in our next few picks if we wanted to bring him on board. I tend to think that between Hedge, McKenneth, Thompson, and Ariola, we can probably get some of those guys in the 3rd round. And if we're looking at the mock draft, there's a chance for guys like Thompson and Hedge in the 4th, 5th round, maybe even beyond. But there are 2 other pitchers that were much more popular with our worldwide scouting department. And one is Danny Dakar, not my 4-ply. Stanley Rosella liked him, and Danny Trainer and Paul West both had him number 1 on their more expansive lists. Dakar is a guy who is durable, high loyalty, adaptability, and work ethic, decent stamina, decent at holding on runners. May only be a 3-pitch arsenal unless that changeup develops, but the fastball is close to major league quality already, and the slider and the curve aren't far off. If everything comes together for him, his stuff, his movement, and control could all be above average at the major league level. Another guy who's already thrown in the mid-90s despite only being 17 years old. Dakar, for whatever reason, lasted until the 4th round of the mock draft, but I agree with the worldwide scouting department, and I like Dakar a bit more than the other pitchers that we've already talked about. So I tend to think he just gives us another option that we could perhaps execute on with one of our supplemental picks, or if we want to get risky, maybe wait till the 2nd or 3rd round for him. But since I do like him more than some of those other guys, I think there's certainly an argument to maybe use a supplemental pick on Mr. Dakar. And then the highest rated pitcher out there was another popular choice with the viewers. Alkshi and Dodo Dude both had him at the top of their lists. He was also on Not My 4-Plies list, and Danny Trainer and Paul West had him number 2 as well. So Faulo, the 18-year-old out of Quebec City, Canada, left-hander, did get some positive scouting reports from the worldwide scouting department. Another guy who may only end up a 3-pitch pitcher, and he's going to need either that changeup or the sinker to develop to get to 3 pitches. Do like his high work ethic, good at holding on runners, and we think his stuff, movement, and control could all be above average. He's a little older than some of these other prospects. He's going to be 19 in November. Doesn't throw quite as hard as most of these other high school prospects. And he's also been facing a poor level of competition in the high schools in Quebec. Not necessarily your hotbed for baseball. So there are good and bad things about Faulo as well. And he's a guy who's projected to go late in the 2nd round. So if we really wanted to ensure that we could bring him on board, well, if we want to ensure that we could bring him on board, the only way to do that is to pick him right now with the 30th pick. But I think we could potentially go after him with one of the supplemental picks as well, and feel pretty comfortable that he'll probably be around for the next 10 picks while we're going to be on the board 3 times. So there are a lot of guys that I like, as we've talked about, but there's really not any one that I'm actually in love with. So I am going to use, to some extent, where I think these players are going to go and who I kind of need to pick right now and who I can perhaps wait on to determine what I'm going to do with these next 3 picks. And because I think we've got a little more time with the pitchers, we're going to go with a position player. I know that's shocking to a lot of you who have watched me over the years, but we are going to use our first pick on a position player. And the 3 guys that we talked about most recently as far as the position players, Andres Vigo, Juan Medina, and Sawyer Wenda, all got support from members of our worldwide scouting department and are all expected to come off the board in the next 8 or 9 picks. So I think it makes sense to take one of them now. And as much as I like Vigo's theoretical highest upside, I don't love the lack of speed. I don't love some of those personality traits. I think I'm leaning away from Vigo. Sawyer Wenda, pretty clean prospect, like the outfield range. Juan Medina was the people's choice, at least among position players. Another guy who I really don't love the speed. I really do like the personality, though. And the bat is pretty well balanced, potentially better than average at everything. I think in a vacuum, I agree with the worldwide scouting department, and I like Medina the best. But I do have to keep in mind that Vigo's expected to go right now, and Wenda's expected to go in about 3 picks. So at least according to the mock draft, Medina's the one who's most likely to be around with our next pick, if we want to double up on outfielders. As much as I don't like Vigo's negative personality traits, that 80 home run power with that durability is tempting to me. But the arm is weak. The speed is just not there. And there are some negative personality concerns. I just like Medina a little bit better, given the positive personality traits, even though his speed is also bad. He's got a better personality, a little better overall in the outfield, although neither is going to be winning gold gloves. I just think there's a better chance that Medina actually reaches his full potential. I do think if I really wanted to roll the dice, you go with Vigo here, and it's probably a 80+% chance that Medina is still available. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 picks from now when we get to go again. But as we saw last year with the relief pitcher out of Purdue, sometimes guys go a lot earlier in the mock draft than those projections show them going. And I just like Medina a little better. I think with the better personality, he's a cleaner prospect overall. He's also a little bit further along with his eye. Not that that's going to be the ultimate determinant of what we do. Scouting director obviously recommends the 5-star potential Vigo if we go with a position player, and the 5-star potential Faulo if we go with a pitcher. But we are going to follow our instincts And we're going to go with the position player that was the most supported by our worldwide scouting department. And we're going to pick Juan Medina here with our first pick. We'll see who's still on the board 6 picks from now. And Vigo is actually still on the board for us. Unfortunately, Wenda, who was supposed to go third to us in the mock draft, came off just a tiny bit early, obviously. If I could click properly and go to the log. Yeah, Wenda came off with the first supplemental pick in the mock draft. He was supposed to be third. You can see Fowlo, the 5-star pitching prospect, who was not supposed to go until the end of the second round, came off the board a little earlier also. He's a guy who I thought we could potentially take with one of these supplemental picks, but honestly, I wasn't as in love with him because there's some probability that he doesn't even get to 3 major league quality pitches. I don't like that he doesn't throw all that hard, and I don't like the poor competition level that he's been facing in Canada. So honestly, he wasn't someone I was really targeting with this third pick, but I can't lie. I would have certainly considered him with the 7th pick. Interestingly, Kevin Fifield, who was supposed to last until the 10th pick of the second round, is also off the board. So certainly a few guys that we talked about are gone. But we still have the highest rated hitting prospect in Andres Vigo out there. And then as far as the pitchers, Fowlo and Dakar were the 2 most popular with the worldwide scouting department. I kind of prefer Dakar, quite honestly. He's not projected to go into the 4th round, so I feel like we can maybe try to get a little cute with Dakar. But we've already seen some pitchers come off earlier than they were expected to. And I don't want to get too cute. And the numbers tell me to go with Andres Vigo right now. He was supposed to go with the 30th pick, so he's lasted longer than expected. And there's a lot of things to like about him. Is the 5-star prospect who's still out there. Dakar, as we talked about, not projected to go to the 4th round. So in theory, waiting just another 3 picks to take Dakar is a very low-risk proposition. But I actually like Dakar and his personality and his durability more than I actually like Vigo. But I think if we want to come out of this draft with both Vigo and Dakar, taking Vigo now gives us the best probability of doing that. Because I think if we pass on to Vigo, he's more likely to go in these next 2 picks than Dakar is. I think we have to show some modest level of respect to the mock draft that shows Danny Dakar not going until the 23rd pick in the 4th round to the Orioles. But the Royals are supposedly going to be targeting a reliever or a pitcher in Lupe Coronado here. But he's already picked and off the board. So could they go in a different direction than they were expected to? I think it's real unlikely that Dakar gets picked before our next pick comes up. It's still, with only a couple picks in between, somewhat unlikely that Vigo also gets picked. But as a 5-star guy who's durable, not looking for a ton of money, I think we go with Vigo right now and just hope that I don't get too cute by waiting for Dakar. And taking a look at the draft log, we were fine. Royals went with a shortstop, Zane Cutler, and the Dodgers went with first baseman Elwood Carrier. So even though we may be being a bit ambitious here compared to the mock draft, I like Dakar. A lot of viewers like Dakar, even though supposedly he's not going to go to the 4th round. I don't want to risk losing out on a durable 17-year-old who throws in the mid-90s, who's got high adaptability and work ethic to hopefully help push him towards realizing his full potential. So with our supplemental pick here in the 1st round, we're going to take Martini Dakar. And as it turned out, Medina looking for well below slot. Vigo and Dakar both coming in asking for slot. They're also supposedly extremely hard to sign, so I don't think I'm going to really mess around with either of them. But we've saved almost $2 million compared to what we had reserved. So with the excess money that we also have in our budget, as we get into the 2nd and 3rd rounds, we could conceivably maybe reach for one of those impossible to sign players that we were talking about earlier. And we've simmed ahead now to our 2nd round pick, 32nd overall. And several of the pitchers that we talked about are still available. Frederick Ariola, projected to go in the 3rd round, still out there. Zach McKenneth, expected to go in the 3rd round, still out there. Billy Thompson in the 5th, projected out there. And then the reliever Chris Hedge also out there. So we still have some interesting choices among the pitchers. And we still got some interesting choices among the batters as well. The 3 impossible to sign guys, center fielder Greg Moreno, shortstop John Howard, and center fielder Doug Mitchell are still out there, along with Joe Wusow, who was projected to go at the end of the 2nd round. As we talked about, Moreno was expected to be the end of the 1st round, but both Howard and Mitchell projected to go in the 3rd round. So they were projected to go before our 3rd round pick. But I don't think it's impossible to think that one of these impossible to sign players will still be around for our 3rd round pick, just because if teams haven't taken them now, they probably don't really have their money in the budget to afford these guys. And I don't think most of these AI-controlled teams run their finances as conservatively as we tend to. So there's probably not any extra dollars to find in most of these budgets. So given that I think we can probably get one of the impossible to sign position players in the 3rd round, not that the mock draft tells us any of them are going to be there, because the mock draft tells us they're all going to be off the board. But I think they're Signing difficulty means that at least one of them will linger. So I think we're going to target one of the two pitchers who's supposed to go before our next pick, and those would be the starters, Zaire McKenneth, right-hander, throws in the low to mid-90s. I think his stuff, movement, and control could all be a bit above average, and a potential 6-pitch arsenal if everything works out. And the other option is Federico Arriola, also throws in the low to mid-90s. Potential 5-pitch arsenal. Similar stamina, but much better at holding on runners. Stuff, high-end, not quite as good, but we think the control could be borderline special. Arriola. And McKenneth are both very borderline two-way players, so I don't think that should really come in and factor in the decision-making. Arriola is supposed to go 10th in the third round. McKenneth's supposed to go 20th. So in theory, there's a slightly higher chance that Arriola is still around, or that McKenneth is still around next round. It's another selection where I don't have a really strong pound-the-table opinion. I know that Paul West thinks Arriola is a 6'8" side armor. Could potentially be extremely difficult on right-handed pitching if his splits develop a certain way. But right now we're at a point with him where who knows what he's going to look like where he's potentially developed. But he's younger. He's better at holding on runners. He's projected to go a little higher in the draft, so there's a somewhat better chance that McKenneth would still be around next round. So we are going to go with Federico Arriola here in the second round. Auto draft now till our third round pick. McKenneth is off the board. Actually, Hedges is off the board as well. So the pitchers that we've largely talked about are gone. Actually, the pitchers that we have talked about are gone. Rory Newman's still a 4-star starting pitching prospect that's out there. Haven't talked about him as much because he, in theory, could be a 4-pitch guy, but there's no guarantees he gets to even 3 pitches. But his stuff, movement, and control could all be above average. Does have a good work ethic. Stamina borderline, not that good at holding on runners. But is a potential third-round pick, although we haven't talked about him for our first 4 picks in the draft. Newman is certainly a guy to think about. But the big question is, did any of those impossible to sign batters last? And my hunch is that there's at least one of them out there. It won't shock me if there's 2 or 3 of them still out there. And there are all 3 still out there. Moreno, Howard, and Mitchell. Wasau is also out there as well. And he was a guy who was projected to go at the end of the second round, so it's about time for him to be going. But another guy with some negative personality traits. But given that we are still well under the money that we've set aside, even though Arriola is looking for a bit more than slot, and given his extremely hard to sign tendencies, we're just going to make the offer to him now and not fool around. We do have some extra money left that we've budgeted, and we've also got some extra money that we've picked up through trades and that we haven't spent this past off season that admittedly could be used to take on some contracts, but can also potentially be used to bring one of these impossible to sign players on board and into our organization. Moreno, the highest rated guy out there, a very well balanced bat, good speed, competent defensively, high adaptability and intelligence. A lot to like about Greg Moreno. Doug Mitchell, another center fielder, pretty well balanced bat, although his potential eye is not as good. Speed is similar, but not necessarily the same instincts on the base paths quite yet. Some really nice personality traits, though. Another guy who's competent defensively. And then John Howard, the shortstop. Durable, not great speed, but a versatile glove that can play just about anywhere in the infield. Although he's not necessarily a perfect defensive second baseman or shortstop, we think he can be competent or better at both of those spots. And as I said, I think third base might be his best defensive position in the infield eventually, with a pretty interesting bat as well if it fully develops. So there's 3 impossible guys to sign out there. I think the question almost becomes, do we push the envelope a little further and maybe hope that one of them falls to us in the 4th round, given that they may have just kind of priced themselves out of the market? Because I'm pretty confident that Rory Newman is a 4-star starting pitching prospect, is not going to still be around in the 4th round. As we talked about, there's no guarantees he even develops a 3-pitch repertoire needed to be an effective starter, unless you've got a knuckleball, based on my experience. Do like the work ethic. I don't think Newman's going to be around in the 4th round, but we've picked a couple of pretty good starting pitching prospects already. It is largely a numbers game, so there's an argument to just bring more on board. John Christian is a real interesting relief prospect that we talked about in the previous episode. Cutter and a knuckle curve combo, but his stuff could be absolutely filthy to go with decent movement and control if he completely developed. Our scout recommends we go with the catcher, Wilbald Bullard. Interesting bat for a catcher, and he's durable, but he's not a catcher defensively. And he's a borderline first baseman at 6'1" with those ratings. I mean, you can basically put anybody at first base in OOTP, but he's got ratings with his height that are bordering on borderline credible for a first baseman. So do I love that bat enough to have him at DH? Probably not. And if my scout were to recommend a pitcher, it would be Dan Novotny. I do like the high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence, but best case scenario is a 3-pitch arsenal, and although he's listed as a starting pitcher, probably need to work on that 35 stamina, which admittedly we can in the development lab now, but also not very good at holding on runners. He doesn't excite me. Rory Newman doesn't really excite me either. John Christensen doesn't excite me. I think there's going to be a pitcher that we're okay with in the 4th round, even if it's not necessarily one of those guys. And given that we've taken a couple of outfielders already with the starting pitchers, that has me leaning towards John Howard, but I don't love the lack of speed. I don't love that we don't have any special personality traits to help boost his development. It's rare for a guy to reach their full potential, especially when you don't have things like work ethic, intelligence, adaptability as potential kickers for his development, or guys in the system with those kind of traits that can maybe positively influence his development with leadership and other things. Seems kind of silly to perhaps take another outfielder, but Moreno, really good speed, high adaptability and intelligence, 60 or higher in every category if he does reach his full potential. Granted, when I say 60 or higher, it's 60, 60, 60, and 65 with home run power. So I'm saying I'm praising him with the tightest possible language I can possibly praise him with. But we're going to go with Moreno here in the third round. And let's just see how wacky the number he's looking for is. Bonus significantly above $11 million. So we can afford it. We're only going to get one shot at signing him most likely. So that's something we'll spend some time thinking about offline. We don't have to figure it out right now. Question is who's available for us in the fourth round. And Howard and Mitchell and Wusow are all still there in the fourth round. Pitching wise, Rory Newman is still around as well. I'm going to roll the dice that Novotny is there as well, too. Scout still recommending Novotny. I do like some of those personality traits. I don't love that it's a 3-pitch arsenal in a best-case scenario with stamina that, although some of you are going to tell me, oh, you can get 4.5, 5 innings out of him consistently at 35. My experience is certainly better when we get that stamina to 40. And I know that some of you are going to say, well, we can also send him to the development lab to improve that stamina and to add more and more pitches to his arsenal. And with that high adaptability, work ethic, and intelligence, that's a very fair argument to make. But we can do the same things with Newman. So we're going to go with Newman here in the fourth round. And maybe Novotny or maybe one of those impossible to sign position players is going to drop to us in the fifth round. Novotny is still around, so presumably, now of course, now that he's sat around 2 straight rounds, our scout is embarrassed and humiliated that I didn't agree with him. So he is recommending we go with Damani Crewthird instead. Potential two-way guy, bad personality traits. Really nice defensive outfielder with a little bit of home run pop. Pitching is very borderline. I don't really see him being a legitimate two-way guy. Did any of the batters drop? The shortstop's gone, but Mitchell and Wusow are still around. I'm surprised Wusow's still there. He was projected to go in the second round, not looking for much money. I think teams might be turned off by those negative personality traits. I think if the shortstop Howard was here, just in terms of getting a somewhat more diversified class, given that our class right now has 3 outfielders and 3 starting pitchers, the shortstop Howard would have been the logical choice. I'm actually going to go back to the pitching well. I don't hate Novotny, the guy that our scout has been propping the last couple of rounds, not looking for a lot of money. And he is a guy who could, especially with some of those positive personality traits, potentially turned into a much more valuable player if we have some good experiences with him in the development lab in a few years. There's also a possibility Novotny maybe lasts till the next round, but I'm not going to risk it. We're going to go with Novotny here in the 5th round. Moving on to the 6th, the reliever Christian is still out there. He could be really interesting. But Mitchell and Wusow are still both out there as well. And just so you know, I have been between these picks spending a little bit of time offline in most cases, just making sure that I'm not missing out on somebody more interesting than the guys that we've been talking about, even if I'm not always showing that to you in an effort to keep this episode from running for hours and hours at a time. We're going to go with the reliever, John Christian. I think for 6th round, a guy who potentially could have off-the-chart stuff if that cutter and knuckle curve both develop is pretty intriguing. 17-year-old, throws in the mid-90s already. Certainly the highest potential guy still out there. Luis Castillo, college pitcher, is out there. He's another reliever. 2-pitch guy. More stamina, but doesn't throw as hard. And you look at his movement and control, just not that exciting a guy to me. So we're going to go with Christian here in the 6th. Did any of the batters last to the 7th? The impossible to sign Mitchell, the outfielder, is gone, which is fine. I don't think we were going to take a second impossible to sign outfielder. But Wusow being on the market, 7th round, I don't typically go for guys with a lot of negative personality traits, but the work ethic, adaptability, and intelligence, he's at least average in those things. We're going to have strong guys around him in the organization to hopefully be a positive influence. He's durable, and he's got a pretty interesting potential bat. As a 7th round guy, he's looking for more than slot at this point, but not an exceeding amount of money. I think Wusow is pretty good value here in the 7th. And if I come across anybody interesting in the final 13 rounds of this draft, I'll be sure to jump back in and let you know. And we didn't actually do anything in the last 13 rounds of the draft that I felt was all that interesting, so I won't and haven't bored you with the details. Newman actually ended up coming in a bit higher, or actually significantly higher than slot for our 4th round pitching pick. But as we talked about, we do have the money this year, and we are going to try to bring on the impossible to sign Greg Moreno. Says that he's looking significantly over $11 million. Even with offers made to everybody else, we've got close to 17. So that does give us the flexibility to still bring on some contracts over the next 3 weeks if we see an opportunity on the trade market, even if we offer him more than that, which we'll need to. I'm going to see if he views $1 million as significant money. He says he needs significantly above 11 million. We're going to offer him 12 million. I don't feel like we have to go crazy with him, particularly given that we've got 3 other outfielders that we also picked in the top 7 rounds of the draft who we like as much or more than Moreno. So we'll find out whether he views 12 million as significantly above 11 million by getting the offer out to Mr. Moreno. And with the draft now in the rearview mirror, we'll just sim these next 6 games into the All-Star break, see if anything materially changes in the standings before we get to the All-Star break, find out how many A's are going to be on the All-Star team this year, and then we'll take a quick look at whether there's any new and interesting names on the trade block before we finish up this episode. And we've split the first 4 games since the All-Star break. Unfortunately, we did lose 2 out of 3 against our division rival Astros at home, but we won the first of the 3-game road trip against San Francisco. We've gotten our first-round pick, Medina, signed, the outfielder, and we've also gotten Danny Dakar, the pitcher that we picked with our second supplemental first-round pick locked up as well. So 2 of the big 3 draftees are in our camp at this point. We're waiting on information from all the rest. We tried to go a little under with Rory Newman, and he's already come back and says he's only going to sign if he gets his full amount. So tried to save a couple $100,000 there, and that did not work out. But hopefully we'll ultimately get Newman into Arizona in relatively short order, along with the rest of these prospects. And we ended up sweeping the series on the road against the Giants, so we have made it to the All-Star break, 1 game behind the Rangers, who have won 5 in a row, but we are 4 games up on the Orioles for the second wild card spot in the American League, and we're 5 games away from being out of the playoffs. The Angels in our division are the closest team to the wild card that isn't in that spot right now. Jake Ortega at the All-Star break, 2nd in the American League in batting, 3rd in the American League in batter WAR, and he is the only one of our players who is high on the leaderboards this year. We have gotten 1 more guy signed. Joe Wusow has come in, still waiting on the rest. Mason Miller, looking for an extension. I know from recent comments from several members of our worldwide scouting department, you guys want me to just cast Mason Miller aside after all of the hard work he has done for us over the years. Some of you are very, very disloyal. It's very disappointing to see the lack of emotion and care that some of you feel for these random numbers on a screen. But I just have more heart, and I'm more of a giving person than some people, so I'm not criticizing, but I will say there are many of you who want us to cast Mason Miller aside after all of the good work that he's done for us, or to pick up another pitcher in the trade market to replace him since he's pitched his way to a 5.58 ERA this year, or swap in Levi Sterling, or Caden Dana, or Ted Johnston, or you don't care who, because you don't care about Mason Miller the same way that I do. And all I'm going to say to those of you who continue to disparage this man's not just fictional baseball ability, but also his fictional character and his fictional heart. After putting up a 4.15 ERA in June, Mason Miller has put up a 0.53 ERA here in the month of July, going 3-0. Hasn't given up a home run this month. And we're going to continue to have a long leash with Mason Miller, because that's the way I run my business. And that's the way I treat these fictional bits and bytes that are they're people to me. And the fact that many of you would just dump this American hero so quickly and so callously is honestly disappointing to me. But we're going to continue to give Mason Miller an opportunity, because that's the way we run this fictional Oakland Athletics organization. turning our attention now back to the All-Star game. And Ted Johnston, who didn't even make our team out of spring training, and we brought him on board after we traded away the lefty reliever Sam Hoover. He's made an all-star team for us as a middle reliever with a 2.49 ERA over 68 and 2/3 innings. Jeremy Scholl also makes the team 4-1 with a 1.83 ERA. Scholl doing a nice job for us in a setup role this year. So 2 pitchers for Oakland on the all-star team. Everyday players. Colt Keith, of course, a perennial all-star for Oakland, having a monster year, 306 average, 23 homers, 64 ribbies, and a 3.5 WAR. Andy Toribio, potential rookie of the year at shortstop, hitting .315, 24 doubles, 14 homers, scored over 50 runs, drove in over 50 runs, a 3.7 WAR for Mr. Toribio. And of course, our 5th and final all-star and our 3rd among our position players, Jake Ortega. All he's doing is hitting .339, 28 doubles, 4 triples, 12 homers, over 50 runs, over 50 ribbies, 14 steals, and a 165 WRC plus with a 5 WAR. So we've got 5 all-stars for Oakland this year at the major league level. And as we get ready for the All-Star game, and we're now 2 weeks away from the trade deadline, doesn't look like the trade block is materially different than it was at the start of this episode. Certainly some interesting names who could help us. We could try to have a reunion with Andrew Nardi, the left-handed reliever. Dylan Lesko, it's kind of interesting that he is on the trade block. He looks like a guy who could definitely help us as a starter. The issue is he just signed a massive extension with the Padres literally within the past couple of weeks, so it's kind of odd that they have him on the trade block, but a 7-year extension at over $40 million a year is not something that I think we can realistically take on. So that takes him out, and then Krisin Harimoto is out with a torn UCL. So Nardi, Harleen Susanna, veteran, if we wanted to go after Corbin Burns, a reunion with Bubba Chandler. There's options out there. I don't know that most of the starting pitching options in particular are any better than the likes of Mason Miller at this point. Batter-wise, kind of a similar-ish situation, quite honestly. Take a look at the top-end batters who are available, and it's still familiar names. Marcelo Meyer, Maui Ahuna, if we look for a middle infielder. Some catchers, Carter Jensen, Harry Ford, Samuel Basallo. Marco Luciano always seems to be on the trade block. Pretty interesting bat, but some negative personality traits, and we really don't need another right-handed hitter who's a mediocre fielder. So there's some options that we'll explore offline. If there's anyone who really has drawn your attention, for those of you who are spending some time on this page, would love to hear about it in the comments section as well. But I do feel like we're in a pretty decent spot right now. And when I think about the fact that we'll be likely getting Elliot Vanello back in a few weeks in early August, that helps. Unfortunately, Julio Del Campo is going to be out even longer than expected with that fractured hand, another 8 weeks of recovery time. So maybe we'll have him in mid-September. So that maybe encourages us to be a little more active in the market for a middle infielder. But we still can also potentially bring up Alejandro Landin, and we've got him learning to play right field, but he will ultimately be a middle infielder for us. And we think that the switch hitting Landin is certainly going to be less expensive in terms of the money he's making, and much less expensive in terms of we won't have to give up any resources to bring him onto the major league roster to potentially help us. He's doing better in AAA this year than he did in his first 23 games there last year. He's been an above-average offensive player, 14 homers and 15 doubles and 243 at-bats. Don't think he's going to be a dynamic offensive player, but think that his bat can be respectable, and he's got a versatile and high-quality infield glove to give us a little more depth and maybe make us not need to bring a Marcelo Meyer or a Maui Ahuna or somebody of that ilk on by a trade over the next couple of weeks. But as we sit here at the All-Star break, there's definitely things that can be improved. Bobby Cabral continues to have a brutal offensive season. Sergio Estrada at second has not followed up last year's season with as good of an offensive season as he had a year ago when he finished third in the Rookie of the Year voting. Fortunately, Bob Day has done a pretty decent job over the past week and a half, 2 weeks since we brought him on board. He's at least able to make contact with the ball, which we can't say about some guys on our team. But I think the hope is certainly that Cabral just snaps out of this season-long funk that he's been in. And certainly, although he's always going to struggle to make contact and he's going to strike out a ton, when we look at what he's done over his career until this season, it certainly seems like a 39 WRC plus is just a lot of bad luck more than anything else. But you never know. Maybe he's just done. Would be weird for him to be done at the age of 27, especially because it doesn't look like his ratings are any different than we think they've always been. But you never know. So if you've got thoughts on what we should do in the trade market, if you've got thoughts on what we did right and what we did wrong in the draft, always helpful for me to hear that kind of feedback. And until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.